Truthspresso, episode 95.
Face it, we all would rather sleep in this morning. That's why God gave us espresso, to kickstart our zombified corpses into hyperdrive. And now, giving your mind and soul the morning shot of truth it craves. This is Truthspresso with Daniel Minnick.
Well, hey friends, this is Daniel Minnick, your host for Truthspresso, coming at you with yet another episode. It's hard to believe that it is episode 95 already. It seems like just yesterday when we started this podcast, and yet God has been good to allow me to continue with 95 episodes already. But I don't know if you can tell, if the sound of my voice sounds a little bit different. It's because I've been rather under the weather this last week, dealing first with a stomach flu and then some head cold symptoms. And so I haven't been able to gather the notes and have my wits about me for really putting together the next episode in the superhero series. But that doesn't mean we're not going to get into superheroes on this episode, because what I bring to you in this episode 95 is actually where yours truly, Daniel Minnick, was a guest on another show. So, on February the 10th, I was interviewed on The Quest for Truth with Keith Heltsley and Nathan Caldwell, and the episode actually aired on The Quest for Truth on March the 8th. And so they were gracious enough to let me cross-release this episode on Truthspresso. So when we recorded this episode on February 10th, I had recorded and released the episode Is Jesus Like Iron Man? And so that was the setting in which we did this interview. I had yet to record the next episode Is Jesus Like the Incredible Hulk? And so as you listen to this episode on Superblians and Superheroes, Superblians in particular, if you have listened way back before the superhero series was started, I did a 3-part series called The Tale of the Superblians. This was my sci-fi story, my audio drama that I did trying to teach economic, political lessons that basically were a satire on the way things seem to be quickly headed as we see today. Things are quickly unraveling before our eyes, and so a lot of the stuff on The Tale of the Superblians just might come true, except for the part of aliens invading. So we talk about The Tale of the Superblians a little for the first half, and then for the second half we talk about my superhero series as it stood at that time, and the identity of Jesus Christ and understanding him through the controversies of church history, and illustrated, as our series has done, with superheroes. And so without further ado, I am going to play a promo for The Quest for Truth. I highly encourage you to check out Keith Heltsley's and Nathan Caldwell's work on the Quest for Truth podcast. They also have kind of sub-podcasts, such as the Protectorate podcast. They also do audio dramas. So they're really two cool guys. They have big hearts. And I was very glad when Keith contacted me to do this interview. And so here we go, Quest for Truth.
Hello, this is Keith Heltsley of Quest for Truth.
And I'm Nathan Caldwell.
Together, we talk about worldviews.
Things that affect our pop culture today.
We role-play the viewpoints represented.
We sift through some of the faulty logic in them.
And compare them to what Scripture says.
Once a month, we dig into the Bible.
Going through one book at a time.
One verse or phrase at a time.
Exposing the truth in Scripture.
Truth Exposed. Hey, that sounds like a good name for a podcast. I like it.
How about explicit truth?
No.
How about Naked Truth?
No.
Check out Truth Exposed on the first week every month.
You missed something, Keith.
Our audio drama.
As long as our Protectorate players have all their parts in.
And our lazy script department has the scripts ready.
Isn't that you?
Make that our hard-working script department.
Watch for new audio dramas on the third week of the month.
Quest for Truth.
Because if it's true
inside the Bible as well as outside the Bible.
Check out life-truth.com.
And so that was the Quest for Truth promo. Go to their website at lifetruth.com. That's life-truth.com. And I will put a link to the Quest for Truth and Life Truth in the show notes for this episode. And now, here we go. The interview that I did for Keith and Nathan on the Quest for Truth on Of Superblians and Superheroes.
Quest for Truth, presented by Protectorate Productions and HPN, Heltsley Podcast Network. Now located at life-truth.com. And now, here is your host, making moles out of a groundhog, Keith Heltsley. Solving all your problems and making your dreams come true. Somebody, please shoot me.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Quest for Truth, the show where we like to talk about worldviews and tackle things in our culture and society, compare it to Bible standards, I guess you would say. What does the Bible say about this? And see how the Christian worldview stands up. And we also like to do interviews, and you may have noticed on our previous episode to this one, we were able to talk with Andrew Rappaport, so I hope everyone enjoyed that. We don't have Nathan Caldwell back. Well, exactly. He may make an appearance in a little bit. But for now, I'm not alone here in Church House Studios, as we like to call it. I have another guest with me. He is another of the fellow podcasters at the Christian Podcast Community, christianpodcastcommunity.org. And hey, I might even slip in a fast promo because I don't have a lot of housekeeping, and I'll slip it in right here, and then we'll get started.
What's up, Dad Hackers? My name is Patrick Antonucci, and I am the host and founder of this podcast and community of Dad Hackers. Whether you're new here or have been here for a long time, I want to personally welcome you. Dad Hackers is a community of Christian fathers who are devoted to encouraging, equipping, and enabling one another to become the men that God has created and designed us to be, so that we can raise up the next generation of fully devoted followers of Christ and leave a legacy of multi-generational faithfulness. On this show, we primarily interview Christian men to dive into their experiences and insights into what it means to be a Christian man, a Christian husband, a Christian father, and a leader. We ask questions that dig deep into the thinking and rationale of these men so that we can all learn and grow into the men that God is calling us to be. I'm grateful you joined us today. Make sure you subscribe so that you never miss any of our episodes. Also, be sure to leave an honest review. Reviews help to boost the show's ratings, which means that more dads are going to come across our show and benefit from the content that we put out. I wanted to let you know that we also have a free private Facebook group just for Christian men. So head on over to facebook.com/group/dadhacker and apply to join by answering the 3 questions when prompted. So that's facebook.com/group/dadhacker.
All right, let's meet our guest, Daniel Minnick, right?
Yes, you pronounced it correctly.
Yeah, because I know my computer voice never does. It always calls you Daniel Minnick. I need to train it to not do that. I may have to get into its pronunciation dictionary. And in case you didn't know, and maybe some of our listeners don't know, I am someone who is blind. I use text-to-speech technology to read things to me. So, yeah, that's why I may mispronounce your name. And if I do, I'm sorry.
No problem. I hear my name mispronounced even by friends, so I'm used to it.
Well, yeah, I try not to. Once I learn someone's name, unless I really love to be called a nickname or something, whatever they want to be called, that's how I try to do. But yeah, Daniel, your podcast is called Truthspresso, and I know you do a lot, of course, Bible teaching, because that's what we do on Christian Podcast Community. But you also have some other interesting topics. I know I really enjoyed your series you did with your wife on the abortion issue. And I know you do a lot of economics type series. But one that recently you've done was something of audio drama. And I know my co-host has some questions about that. And I trying to find these notes here so I can stay on board with what's going to be said. But hey, Nathan Caldwell is here, and he wants to know.
So first off, Daniel, give us a little bit about yourself and your show. When did you get started podcasting?
Well, as Keith mentioned, my name is Daniel Minnick, and I am the host of the Truthspresso podcast, although that's not the first time that I attempted a podcast. There's a little bit of history there. So I do run a website that I don't update as much as I would like to, called Truth Hub. So truthhub.org is my website. And originally, actually, it all started with a book that I wrote that I don't market that much, but my book that I wrote way back in 2011 is called Freedom to Give, the biblical truth about tithing. And I actually take kind of the controversial position in that book that, like, the Bible does not teach that we're required to tithe in the technical sense, the Christian, but it does teach that we are required to give. And so, that's a discussion for another episode, perhaps. But I wrote the book, Freedom to Give. One of my distant relatives from my wife's side of the family was also interested in publishing a book. And so I explained to him how I published Freedom to Give. And he also showed up at my book signing. And I knew that he had some interesting theological positions, but basically half of my book signing turned into me having a discussion with this family member, not about the topic of my book, but about one of the topics of his book that he was trying to publish soon afterwards. But he basically held a position similar to Jehovah's Witnesses that Jesus is not eternal with the Father. He's not co-equal with God. He's the greatest creation of God. And so I argued the deity of Christ with him for about half the book signing time there. And after I had the discussion with him, I wanted to really study the matter more. And so I studied the deity of Christ, and I came up with a Bible study that I had with my family, not him there, but my immediate family. So for several months, I led a Bible study with them, going through the deity of Christ, the proof for that. And originally my website was freedomtogive.net, but then after the first year, I changed it to truthhub.org and started to blog with a series to prove the deity of Christ and the doctrine of the Trinity. And so that took off in my interest in apologetics. And so as I was getting into apologetics and truthhub.org, I also was listening to podcasts and thought, yeah, I want to try doing that. I don't want to just write, I want to talk. And so in 2015, I started the Truth Hub podcast kind of as part of the content matter of the website. And so I did a few episodes. I was a little bit ambitious because I thought I could create and script out an elaborate fake commercial for every episode. And then I kind of got worn out from trying to do that. And so that aspect of it kind of slowed down the Truth Hub podcast into Podfade. And so later on, back in 2019, just a few years ago now, I got reinterested in podcasting, and I tried to research, like, how do I avoid pod fade? What do I need to do to be a successful podcaster? And I realized, figure out the consistent schedule. Don't try to overburden yourself. Now, originally I tried to, for the Truthspresso podcast, I was trying to come up with different names instead of.
Oh yeah, because that's, I think Nathan Caldwell has a question there. Let me have him ask you this.
Okay.
Now, how did you come up with your title?
Oh yeah. So that's what I was going to get into. I was trying to figure out, based on the topics, I was like, I want to do apologetics. I also have ideas about economics that I wanted to do also at the time. And so I was thinking of the Truth and Freedom podcast. So, basically, okay, my ideas about liberty and also my apologetics. And so that name eventually changed before I can do anything. And then I was trying to figure out, like, I need a name that's kind of catchy. And so I thought, I thought about creating a podcast based on the fact that Andrew Rappaport, that you interviewed last episode, had a daily podcast that's 2 minutes pretty much on the dot, Monday through Friday. And I thought maybe I should do something like that. Maybe that would be the easiest way to have a podcast. I can just research.
The daily podcast is rough.
Yeah, I soon found that out, and I started to figure out, like, well, maybe instead of having, 5-minute episodes, maybe I should do Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and do like 10-minute episodes or something like that. And then I started to cut back. Well, maybe how about 15-minute episodes, 2 days a week, and then eventually, I settled on once a week.
Yeah, a weekly schedule is a really good schedule to keep. I think the trick behind Andrew's daily is he saves it all up, and he does all 5 shows on like the weekend.
Mm-hmm.
He just slices it, or he just cuts them up in 2-minute segments. So he sits down and record them all, and but he has the breaks so that they break apart, which is smart.
Yeah, I thought of doing that too. And that's why I thought of Truthspresso, like being like your morning coffee, and, just some quick little shot of something. But then I figured, okay, I was thinking of just quick little topics. And then even that was just a little bit overwhelming, because it would be easier to just ramble on if I know one topic. And so then I went to, I'll just do one episode a week, even though I'll still retain Truthspresso. I don't know how much that will make sense with just one episode a week, but I figured, if I get enough episodes out there, people might just binge listen to it maybe, and they'll listen to it every day. So maybe that'll work.
Yeah, well, I think Nathan has our question here.
I don't like coffee. Should I still listen?
Well, yeah, let's see.
Yeah.
I know there's caffeine in, you could probably put espresso in other drinks like energy drinks
Oh,
and
yeah.
maybe disguise it so that you can't taste the coffee.
Be
But,
shaking like a chihuahua or something.
it's like, oh, well, I guess if the truth outweighs the espresso, then maybe it'll be worth it for Nathan. But
I guess you could enjoy your favorite drink.
yes. Enjoy whatever drink you want, Nathan, but, I highly encourage you to listen to Truthspresso.
Yeah, I like the concept. I like the opening where, with the chainsaw. Yeah, we play your promo from time to time on the show. We squeeze it in. And so I'm sure our listeners are familiar with that. If they haven't listened to your show, I would highly encourage them to do that. Now, I know because both Nathan and I, we kind of have a bit of a background in audio drama. Before we hooked up as co-hosts, he had a podcast, he still does, where he does short audio dramas from time to time. And I did a retro radio podcast for years before I even started doing this one, and I still do, which of course involves, old-time radio dramas. And so we were really into that kind of thing. And that's why I went back and listened to your old radio commercials that you did, whether you like them or not. I do.
Yeah.
But Nathan has a question.
Recently, you went off your usual track of lessons and lectures, didn't you? What were you thinking?
Referring to your audio drama.
Oh, are you talking about the Tale of the Superblians?
Okay, I have to admit, the sci-fi story was awesome, and it had some great teaching in there as well. The Superblians remind me of Christian conservatives. We share what is right, but there's often blowback. Is that a fair comparison?
Yeah, well, let's see. So
yeah, I liked it too. You did all the voices. I have to say, I for a little bit thought about doing an audio drama where I voice things, but I didn't know how that would work. And you do a good job at it with changing the tone and pitch.
I tried to imitate, because there are people in the Tale of the Superblians who are real people, but they're parodies of them, and I tried, but failed miserably to imitate their voices. But so
like if you had I don't know, not Donald Trump, but you do his voice or do a Mickey Mouse voice, you would try to imitate that, and it didn't work.
Yeah, I think it's my personality, but I have a hard time referring to people. If I'm supposed to be that person, I've got to try to imitate their voice.
Yeah, you kind of have to get into their headspace a little bit, I think.
So do you want to know about where that whole idea came from, the Tale of the Superblians?
So you can take that and attack it however you want.
Yeah. Well, so kind of a basic background to how I came up with that story. I know that if you've heard of some of the dystopian novels, you have Atlas Shrugged and stuff like that. Now I wanted to do something. I've had kind of the idea about aliens invading in a way, but their invasion is actually a good thing. But it was based on kind of the way I'd see politics trending, such that it's people would tend to kill the goose that laid the golden egg, as it were. So I've even years ago I've seen people economists, free market economists, explain, they'd ask people the question, what if you had a magic wand that if you waved it, it would, you could create things from nothing, or you could end world hunger, would that be a good thing? But then people are influenced by the prevailing economics, Keynesianism. Actually, they start to think and say well, it might seem like a beneficial thing, but first of all, that will put certain people out of a job, and that would be horrible. So that, and if you put some people out of a job, then you end up causing a depression, and that would destroy the economy. Even if you think it helps, it actually destroy it.
For an example, you mentioned world hunger. I mean, would that be a good example? Let's say you did end world hunger, and people in third world countries now have enough to eat, enough their daily requirement. How might that be a bad thing?
Yeah, I mean, the whole idea is common sense. What it would be a good thing. Even the Bible talks about feeding the hungry, taking care of the orphans and widows. And so, even if we had the equivalent of a magic wand or benevolent aliens invading and introducing technology, I would think from a Christian perspective, that would be a good thing to help improve people's lives. And so the whole idea there is to show, as it's a good thing. Common sense says it's a good thing, but people have been led astray by politics, and the idea of the government controlling things, and especially, the evil that I consider the Keynesian idea that gets people to think the exact opposite of the truth. And so, get people to pit against other people, and then they look at the idea like, well, it's unfair that these Superblians can get the best jobs, or they have things that are better, and so equality of outcome is better than how good things actually are for the bottom line. And so I actually try to work in contemporary thinking into the story to try to get people to understand, like, wait a minute, like I had that unsettling comment by the main character's friend where he asks, like, did we do the right thing?
Yeah. And I happened to just thinking, like for world hunger, let's say suddenly there was enough, rice bowls to feed everybody. Well, then people become dissatisfied or take it for granted, much like manna in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
It's the free food, but they grumbled about it from, almost day one. So yeah, maybe, world hunger, it's not just a matter of conquering it. Once you fit that need, people are going to find a different need to gripe about.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. That's a good illustration with the Israelites in the wilderness. They had supernatural provision of everything they needed, but then they thought, well, there's an injustice here because it's not the way I think it should be.
Yeah. Now, another question from Nathan.
So will the Superblians ever come back?
So by come back, Nathan, do you mean like, am I going to have a sequel, or does it mean like, will the Superblians, after having left, come back to Earth?
Well,
will we be hearing any other tales from you?
Oh, well,
yeah. Will there be a sequel?
Yeah, I have to think of, if I'm going to make a sequel, how it would turn out any different from the first one, and like what other lessons can I do. But as far as the Superblians coming back, that would depend on how they feel that they can be safely invited back to Earth again and not end up having to gather their things and leave again.
Because your story didn't end with like massive war and closing the doors and burning bridges behind them. They feasibly could come back if the right lesson came along.
Yeah, it's like dystopian light. Okay, so
like I said, we enjoyed the audio dramas, and so yeah, we both of us got a kick out of the Superblian tales.
Cool.
Speaking of playing off the superb and Superblian, now you currently are doing a superhero series, and I wanted to have you talk about that a little bit. Now I wanted to ask though. We actually had a superhero series
Oh, you did?
Yeah, thank you.
Similar?
For last. No, I know you didn't, because yours is a lot better than ours.
Oh. So you compare Jesus to superheroes?
Yeah, well, early on, we had a 6 series bit on Messiah as a superhero. And basically, I mean, Nathan came up with the outline for it, and we just kind of batted ideas back and forth. For example, the first one was, of course, his origin. Superheroes have origin stories. So we talked about his birth and creation of the world and stuff like that. Superpowers, we talked about his temptation in the wilderness and power over demons and such. His secret identities. You even discussed this, I think, on yours, Jesus as a secret identity, God in the flesh. We kind of touched on that too. But again, I think you did a better job. The character, superheroes have good character. Jesus was concerned about widows and orphans. And then our last one was mighty deeds, and we kind of came full circle on, more of the miracles, walking on water and that kind of thing. So that's kind of a fast rundown on how we walked through Jesus, comparing him with certain traits of superheroes.
Cool.
But I like your approach. You apply superheroes and you compare early church heresies, which is a pretty good slant.
Yeah. Like how I came up with that, actually about 2 years ago, I was the Sunday school teacher at my church for one of the adult classes that I was attending. He had to go out of town, and he let me take over. Originally, it was going to be, I think, 1 or 2 sessions. And so I started to teach what I know, which was, who is Jesus? So I had a series that I entitled That I May Know Him. And so I started to go through the early heresies to try to explain, to independent Baptists there in my church, who Jesus is like, that we can often forget. And so as I think it was on the second week, I was starting to think to myself, like, am I getting through to people? Is this understandable, trying to explain one person with 2 natures and what constitutes a nature, and how do you not confuse the two or confuse person and nature? And I could see some people like maybe start to fall asleep or something like that. So then I, like, halfway through the second session, I started to come up with superheroes to illustrate it. Like, okay, they're talking about Docetism is, like, he's not like Superman. Superman looks human, but he's not really human. That's like Docetism. And so then I started to think of, like, okay, yeah, Batman, he's really cool, but he's a superhero, but he's only human, and that's not what Jesus is like. And then I actually ended up doing, I think, at least 6 sessions. So when the Sunday school teacher came back, then I asked him about it. I'm like, I'm not finished.
People were studying comic books instead of their church quarterlies, and they're like, what's going on here?
Yeah. So then I started to look up, like, I think I think I could figure out a superhero that would illustrate each of these. So then I talked about, Superman as Docetism, Batman as Ebionism and Socinianism, and then, like, Arianism. I kind of thought of Thor being, the son of Odin, and then let's see, what did I go to next? Then
it was Iron Man, wasn't it?
Iron Man, yeah. So I did Iron Man there and explain, okay, like, think of it as a reverse Iron Man. Jesus is not just in a human suit driving it around. What is a full human nature composed of? And then there's the Hulk, for Nestorianism, he's not
Jesus
like two
smash.
personalities. Yeah, I explained that. So I'm like, Jesus is in the boat, which I'll probably do when I get to that episode. When Jesus calms the storm, it's not like the Hulk comes out and says, "Peace, be still," and then, eventually, then when it's done, the disciples say, "What manner of man is this?" And then Jesus kind of comes to himself like, "Wait, did I just do that?"
Yeah.
Like a split personality. And then I think I had Spider-Man as Eutychianism, the two mixture of the natures, but then I actually started to do like go after that and do like on monothelitism, like one will instead of two wills. And I came up with the idea of Dr. Octopus from Spider-Man. I really tried to find a good guy, a superhero to illustrate it, but I couldn't think of anyone else besides Dr. Octopus with the inhibitor chip to inhibit his human will and have only the divine will, the divine will of the legs there.
Yeah.
So I'll still do that for this series, but I do want to say, because it was brought to my attention that someone actually did write a book about this. I think his name is Todd Miles, and he wrote a book called Superheroes Can't Save You. So when I became aware of this, I started to look at the superheroes that he used, and I'm like, really? He used the Hulk and Spider-Man and like Batman and Superman, and I'm like, yikes, I'm thinking the same thing that he is. Like, I better, so like when I record the next episode, even I'm going to do it on the Green Lantern. I thought of, the Green Lantern works for adoptionism. And then found like he did the Green Lantern too. Like, I better let the listeners know that someone did this. And, I didn't intentionally copy him.
Yeah.
I know. It's like, who else do you illustrate some of these with? But instead of Spider-Man.
Each superhero has their personality and their own set of super traits, and each of those heresies has their own types of characters and traits. I mean, it would just be, you would think, as simple as taking a personality test, that anybody who is wise to it would figure it out, and it sounds like you have. Now, one thing I'll say is sometimes the names of the old heretics, I don't know who they are, but through your explanation, it's like, I can see the heresy you're describing, and you can also see it hasn't gone away.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I thought about doing something of a series on heresies based on, people out there say, there's a special knowledge, you got to be in the know, you got to be woke, as it were. If you're not woke and have this knowledge, well, that's Gnosticism. That goes way back. It's even mentioned in the Bible, I think, not to do with that. And just kind of start with today. Oh, it's this new thing, new age, yeah. And then go back and say, we'll go back to this 2nd century or something, and kind of taking it backward, starting with, hey, I know this. And I think you're doing that with the superheroes. You're starting with something familiar people know, and then you're diving back into the, I'd like to use the words, dusty and musty church history stuff. But I think it works,
Yeah. Because I think church history is important. It's kind of like, as George Santayana said that, something to the effect that those who do not learn from history, are doomed to repeat it. And so it's like you see every single one of those heresies in history show up again. I've talked to people who were Nestorian on Facebook. I've talked to some people on Facebook and in person who are obviously Eutychian, and monothelite. And I've talked to I've actually talked to Gnostics, as I mentioned in the one episode about Superman. And yeah, of course, I don't know if you ever heard of Sir Anthony Buzzard, who's a Socinian that James White and Michael Brown debated. It's like that's like the Batman heresy, and
and like I said, sometimes the names of the labels, I guess maybe it's just me. Sometimes the labels kind of don't stick, but the description of what they mean do, which maybe it's a bunny trail, but it reminds me of John the Baptist when the people come up, "Are you the prophet?" "No, I'm not the prophet, but I do this," and he describes exactly what the prophet was predicted that was going to happen. He didn't use the label because he didn't want the baggage or the confusion, but he said, "This is what I'm doing. You decide." So I'm more of I can grab the description, whether the label's there or not. But it's good to have those labels because for people who that matters, and you have something to call it.
Yeah. So, like with those superheroes, I don't know if you kind of can see the trend in history. It's almost like a pendulum. It's like, oh, he's only fully divine. No, he's only fully human. No, he's partially divine or whatever. No, he's partially human. Oh wait, no, no, okay, he has the two natures, but they're split. No, okay, that's wrong. Oh, he has the two natures, but they're mixed together, and stuff like that.
There was, I think it might have been the recent one on Iron Man, but I don't remember. It might have been the previous one about the two natures, and when one of the early debates was. I think it was Iron Man. It was Jesus that's God in a suit,
Yes.
Was there really a mental intellect inside there named Jesus, or was that just God like a puppet?
Yeah, God operating a human body like a machine type of thing.
Yeah, like a puppet or something.
Yeah, or a suit. Yeah, it's like actually
to a man, Jesus was actually in a coma, and it was God like possessing him like a spirit. Yeah, that's kind of, I guess, the concept of that heresy. And I know early on, and everyone progresses in their Christian walk, and they develop. And for a while, I thought stuff like that. I thought, well, I guess that would work, but it didn't always explain things satisfactorily.
Yeah, I could say I thought about that too, and I was like trying to read about who Jesus is in apologetics and stuff, and I encountered Apollinarianism, and when I read the description about it, at first I thought, like, what's wrong with that? Like, I think a lot of mainstream evangelicals tend to think like an Apollinarian, that Jesus is like Iron Man, reverse Iron Man. The incarnation is God took on a body and is walking around on the earth. And so when I read the description of that, at first I thought, what's wrong with that? Why is that so bad? And then I read Gregory of Nazianz's writing, and it's like, oh, wow, he makes a good point there. Yeah, what is not assumed is not healed. And I'm like thinking, wow, these early church apologists, these writers were like, they were so focused on substitutionary atonement. And then as I read about all of these heresies and the how the apologists would explain things, like everything always had to do with substitutionary atonement. Like that was the thing. And so then I realized, as I mentioned in the last episode, like, and when you think like a philosopher, you're thinking about like, how do I explain the metaphysics of something? If I can't understand the metaphysics, then it can't be true. And how do I explain God walking on the earth? And then I explain, like, Christianity is all about why he came, and you start with why he came, what was the purpose, that actually then leads back to, well, then who is he? That's
and if here's another thought maybe along that line, is if the end purpose was Jesus was going to be the suit of flesh, as it were, for God to hang on a tree and be the atonement, well, why did he come as a child? Why was he born as a baby? You might say, well, duh, that's how people are born. Well, look at the Old Testament. Jesus made appearances through there. I mean, theologians will point out all kinds of places where, oh, that's Jesus, and here's Jesus. Whenever was it Joshua met the man in the warrior, and he says, "Are you for us or against us?" This is, I forgot.
Yeah.
That was Jesus. Okay, so Jesus, if he wanted to, he could show up fully formed, fully grown, do his thing, button heads with the theologians, hang on the cross. Why did he have to come as a baby? And I think it's because he had his own personality, separate and from God and the Holy Spirit, and he wanted to experience life from moment zero up until the death on the cross. And I think because he had his own intellect, you have to ask, when does your intellect start? It starts when your body develops. It starts at birth or conception. And I think he had to be born starting from being in Mary's womb, because that's when life starts. That's when your mind attaches to your body. Then when you die, your mind, I guess, unattaches to your body and goes to what comes next. And so, yeah, he did have to. I mean, he was God in, what's the word? Attributes. But he was fully man as far as the human experience goes,
Yes, and yeah, to answer the question about, well, why did he have to do all that? Why did he have to be born and be a young child in the temple and grow up and do the whole thing with whatever bar mitzvah and stuff like that? It's like, it's all about substitutionary atonement, and substitutionary atonement isn't just the death on the cross. Even if you look at church history, you look at Irenaeus of Lyon, the apologist who wrote against heresies. Now, we'll point out that he wasn't correct in that he believed that Jesus died on the cross. Jesus was about 50 years old when he died on the cross, but his reasoning for it was, he had to be old enough to get through every stage of human development. Like, there was so much focus in the early church about substitutionary atonement, even to that point where Irenaeus thought like his life couldn't end too early because he has to go through every stage of human development, including a certain age and stuff. But yeah, part of it is that he couldn't be the substitute unless he were truly human. Now, if he just appeared on the scene, even had a body of flesh, like, okay, now it's time to die, that wouldn't work. As Paul said in Galatians 4:4-5, that I quote in several of those episodes, God sent forth his son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem them that are under the law. Like, so obviously he had to be born as one under the law. He had to be fully human. He had to experience humanity, and his living the sinless life was part of him being the spotless lamb, as John the Baptist says, "Behold the Lamb of God that taketh away the sin of the world." Substitutionary atonement depends on someone starting as a fetus, in the womb of Mary, going through that, being born, living under the law as our perfect example. And if he has a full life of one under the law, fully human, God, one person with two natures, a full human nature there, that qualifies him to be the spotless lamb who can then die as a lamb without spot or without blemish. Then he can be our substitute. And so substitutionary atonement, I know as good, evangelicals, it's like all about the cross, but yeah, for sure it is about the cross, but it's also about the burial and the resurrection. It's also about him having to live a full, perfect life under the law, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem them that are under the law. So his whole life, his ministry, his miracles, his teachings, everything was all in that package of being of the substitutionary atonement.
Because I mean, how could he really pay that price unless he was the full package? I think it's Andrew Rappaport is always saying that to pay an eternal price, you have to have an eternal being. The body was the body of a man, but the eternal being is what makes it the substitutionary atonement, because God is actually, God's a spirit. He doesn't live and die like we live and die. But if he could do it, he would, and he did.
Yes.
Oh man, yeah. There's a lot to learn there with superheroes and heresies, and like I said, all these things that you mentioned is like at some point in my Christian walk, it's like I've trying to make sense of it. It's like, maybe it's this. No, that doesn't sound right. Maybe it's that. But like I said, early on, there were really smart thinkers in the church who really hashed this out. People like to say, have what's it called, a chronological snobbery. Oh, they were so dumb back then. They didn't know. Well, they did. They were a lot smarter than what you think they were back then. And they had it figured out. But the heresies keep coming back.
Yeah, if you read Athanasius's On the Incarnation and against the Arians, you see that a lot of the arguments we use against the Jehovah's Witnesses, he was using against the Arians. So, we stand on the shoulders of giants. We just need to recognize what history provides us and benefit from it.
Yeah, and I've never been much to study church history. Being a good Baptist and all,
Yes.
You just read the Bible and you go from here, and that's good. That's good, but it does pay, because all of a sudden you're out in the world and somebody slams you with something like the Epicurean argument about why is there evil in the world. You're like, that almost makes sense, but when you start digging into it, it's like none of it makes sense. There's four points to that argument, and the only one that even is directed towards is the third argument, and all that does is ask the question. It doesn't prove anything. It just makes the question worse. I don't know. I just briefly to describe that for somebody who doesn't know what that is basically the statement say that if God is either good and powerless, therefore there's evil, or he's malicious, even though he has power, therefore there's evil. The third question is, so why is there evil? And then the fourth question, I forget what it is, because by then you lost me. Because the important question is whether there's God or not, there's still evil. And if you want to say there's evil, so therefore there's no God. Okay, great. There's no God. Now tell me, why is there still evil? You just proved there wasn't any God. So I'll tell you, it comes from the same place. Read Genesis 3.
Yeah.
Evil comes from humanity. It doesn't come from God.
Yeah, for that type of question, that type of challenge, then it's like you go into presuppositional apologetics and then ask, well, if God doesn't exist, then how do we even define evil? It's just your opinion, and you have no absolute standard to which to appeal to say that this is right or wrong.
And these kind of alleged new challenges, no, they're not new. And it's good to read the Bible and live your life and be good disciples. But once in a while, you'll find somebody who tosses the stumbling block. And if you examine it, it's like, and you read church history, it's like, this has been around for so long. You just have to, be aware. It's nothing new.
Yes.
Oh, man. Well, I guess we've been talking for quite some time. I don't like to have a super long show. I think this might be a good spot to officially wrap up. And I know Nathan Caldwell has one last thing he wants to say here.
Well, Daniel, I wish I could have been available to discuss with you guys in person. I'm glad you got to be on. How can people contact you?
let's see, you can go to truthhub.org, and if I remember correctly, there might be an email there. Otherwise, you can find me on Facebook. My email is truthspresso@truthhub.org if you want to contact me related to the podcast, or there's also Daniel@truthhub.org.
And I would say make note of those, because I went to your website looking for a contact form. I couldn't find it.
Yes,
I went to the search box and looked for email, and I found a thing that says, send me your email and I'll send you this book about Jesus. I thought, okay, click. I never did get the book.
Oh, well, I better check that, because I thought I tested it. So it shows how often I update my website.
Email. So.
Okay.
But yeah, check out the webpage and send Daniel email. Check out the podcast as ours. It's on Christian Podcast Community.org. And you'll find his and a bunch of other shows there. And I haven't found a bad one yet. They're all really good.
Mm-hmm.
I feel bad because everybody sounds a lot smarter than me.
I feel bad because I think everyone, is like more relatable and, cooler than I am.
Well, I wouldn't go that far. But yeah, so we will go ahead and wrap this up officially, and we'll get our closing credits here to cue up and roll in the music.
Visit life-truth.com, where you can find all our shows. Leave a message or call our voicemail number at 401-753-4844. Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/LifeTruthPage. Follow us on Twitter at H, P, N, C, AST. Everything Nathan Caldwell does can be found at facebook.com/protectors of the book. Music in the show is used by permission of Kevin Zerby at zerbinator.wordpress.com. May the word of Christ dwell in you richly. May you find everything you need. And if you don't know Jesus, your greatest need is a Savior. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for waking up with Truthspresso. Good morning, and God bless your day.
Hey friends, Daniel Minnick here again. If you liked waking up to this episode of Truthspresso, I would really appreciate it if you would rate it on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or whatever application you use to listen to Truthspresso.